Homily for the third Sunday of Lent, Year B. My house shall be called a house of prayer. Our readings for this Sunday are from Exodus chapter 20 verse 1 to 17, 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 22 to 25, and the Gospel of St. John chapter 2 verse 13 to 25. In the first reading, we learn about the 10 commandments which represent the terms of God's covenant with the people. The second reading is about the cross of Calvary, the symbol of the new covenant, how it is perceived by those who do not believe, and what it truly means for those who do believe. The gospel is the powerful story of how Jesus, angered by what he observed in the temple in Jerusalem, carried out a cleansing of the temple as part of his mission to complete the Mosaic law. The temple in Jewish history and tradition. The temple, also called the sanctuary of the Lord, was God's dwelling place among his people. It was the holiest place in Israel and was built on Mount Moriah, the very place where Abraham offered his sacrifice to God. Before the emergence of the temple, God's presence was represented by the tabernacle, in which the Ark of the Covenant was placed. King David had planned to build the temple, but God did not allow him to do so. It was King Solomon who eventually built the temple in 950 BC. It took about 13 years to complete the magnificent structure. It was made of local limestone, cedars from Lebanon, and a great quantity of gold and silver. The temple was, however, destroyed in 587 BC by the invading Babylonians under Emperor Nebuchadnezzar. The vessels and ornaments in the temple were carried away along with the people to Babylon. In 515 BC, the Jews returned from exile and they built a new temple under the reign of King Zerubbabel. The Jerusalem temple played several roles in the life of Jesus. As a Jewish child, he was presented in the temple on the 40th day. At the age of 12, Jesus went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem with his parents, and he worshipped at the temple. He stayed behind at the end of the festival to talk with the elders and teachers. See Luke chapter 2, verse 22 to 52. It was also at the pinnacle of the temple that Jesus was tempted by Satan. Matthew chapter 4, verse 5 to 6. In the life of the early church, the temple was a place of significance. The apostles gathered with Mary, the mother of Jesus, and others to pray in the temple courts. The first martyr of the church, Stephen, was killed on the Temple Mount, and James, the leader of the church in Jerusalem, was thrown down from the pinnacle of the temple and killed. Cleansing the temple, the end of the old covenant. The presence of money changers and sellers of pigeons, rams, and goats at the temple was not understood as an abuse at that time, because these animals and the salesmen, as well as their furniture, were part of the structures of worship by the Jewish people of that time. The worshippers, depending on their means, were required to sacrifice rams or pigeons at the temple. They needed to exchange the Roman currency they often possessed for Jewish currency, because only Jewish currency was allowed to be taken as collection in the temple. The priests made provision for these commercial activities to take place in the court of the Gentiles. By driving out these merchants from the temple, Jesus was ridding the temple of those who provided the worship items that were required by the people. So, why was he doing this? Jesus was making a protest and passing a judgment against the commercialization of religion and the desecration of the temple. When people are buying and selling in the temple courts, apart from the general distraction, there will also be the desire to make a profit, to cheat, and to engage in other negative practices that violate true worship. In addition, Jesus was protesting the narrow, nationalistic, and exclusivist view of religion, by which the court of the Gentiles was considered profane and treated as profane. The commercial activities which they considered profane could only take place in the court of the Gentiles, not in the court of the Hebrews. As far as Jesus was concerned, all people were created equally by God, and the distinction and denigration of one set of people by another was wrong. Finally, Jesus was also passing judgment on the entire Jewish religious system, characterized by animal sacrifices that can no longer bring people closer to God. He was introducing them to the new covenant which transcends the Mosaic law and the Ten Commandments. His new covenant is the covenant of love. Jesus signals the end of the old covenant written on tablets of stone and inaugurates a new covenant written in his blood and on the hearts of men and women, in line with the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah. Yes, Jesus ended the old religion of worship in a physical temple with material sacrifice and outward rituals, and he replaced it with a deeper, more profound worship in spirit and in truth. Rather than worship characterized by the sacrifice of rams and pigeons, Jesus offered a more authentic kind of worship with a humble and contrite heart, with a loving and forgiving heart, and a life full of mercy and compassion. Jesus demonstrated that the physical temple is no longer the greatest sign of God's presence. It is no longer the principal place to meet God. In fact, Jesus is our new temple, a temple not made of stones, expensive wood, gold, and silver, but a temple made of his body. The cross, sign of the new covenant. The new religion that Jesus inaugurated is the religion of the cross, which is a scandal to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. The cross is the foolishness of God that is wiser than any human wisdom, and the weakness of God that is stronger than any human strength. The cross is the center of the new religion, and Jesus says that if we want to be his followers in this new religion, we must renounce ourselves and carry our crosses every day. What we see in the cross of Calvary is the death of sin, the death of disobedience, the death of darkness, and in a manner of speaking, the death of death itself. The old law versus the new law. Jesus fulfilled and perfected the old law with the new law of love. Whereas the old law focused on avoiding evil as the criterion of virtue, the new law focused on doing good. The old law had many negative prescriptions, while the new law is dominated by positive prescriptions. Jesus did not come to condemn the old law, but to perfect it, to fulfill it, or to transcend it. If there are aspects of the Old Testament that contradict the New Testament takes precedence, while the Old gives way. In the new dispensation, Jesus teaches us that religion is a matter of the heart. Growth in our religion is not measured by the size or volume of our sacrifices, but in the transformation of the heart that the sacrifice represents. In this new covenant, we strive to do good, not simply so that we do not offend God. Rather, we strive to do good in appreciation to God, who loved us and sent his only Son to die for us while we were yet sinners. The temple in Jerusalem was the center of the Jewish faith. Jews came from all over the world to worship at the temple and celebrate important feasts. As a Jew, Jesus often worshipped at the temple with his family, in line with Jewish customs and traditions. One of the cardinal goals of Jesus' ministry was to complete the old law. The cleansing of the temple was one of the ways that Jesus demonstrated the emergence of a new era. He identified himself as the new temple of God and his body and blood as the new sacrifice. We are therefore challenged to look beyond the mere physical acts of worship and rather focus on the deeper spiritual disposition of loving surrender and obedience to God. God bless you.